See guys, I told you I could steer the ship.
Keep going! You're good! You're good! You're good!
Oh man, what happened? Alright, that's not that bad. Just kidding guys, it's really bad. It really is bad. Hi, this is a toast guide, aka the Blazing Elder Dragon, aka the Infernal, aka the Emperor of Flame. You know, Toast. Anyways, Toasty is a pretty old school monster, having been introduced in Monster Hunter DOS. So it was pretty cool to see him brought back in World, since they hadn't included Lunastra up until recently. They had been focusing on him a lot more in the past couple games, giving him new devastating moves, making improvements to his AI and whatnot, and just making his fight overall more interactive and challenging. Now, having past experience with Teostra would definitely help you in his fight here, since you would be able to... Anyways, what I was saying is that being familiar with him would help. Anyways, the overall fight didn't change that much, but they did make a couple of key changes that made his fight both easier and harder at the same time, and I'm gonna go over why. But what they did achieve for sure is that they made Teostra a lot more fun to hunt, which I really do appreciate. Alright, so a cool thing Monster Hunter World did is that they made Teostra a bit more erratic and cat-like. He's always been a cross between a dragon and a lion, but I feel like they never really played with his lion side too much until now. He's always been kinda linear, just trying to get you with his tackles, the occasional flame breaths, and his dust clouds. And then of course when they added the Supernova, that was factored in too, but he was always just a bit predictable in comparison to some other monsters. He still has all these same moves, but again, I feel like with the changes they made to his movement and his actions, it made the fight more fluid and even a little bit more challenging, in my opinion. However, some changes to the moves and some specific hitbox interactions also made his fight easier, but I'll talk more about that a little bit later in the video. Stats time! If you've watched any of my previous guides, you'll recognize this part. This is where I analyze the hit zones and the weak spots, but this time around I didn't have to do as much digging because they've kind of streamlined the whole thing and they put it built into the game, as opposed to in the past where we had to go to an outside source to figure out where we really wanted to be hitting. So now we have this little researcher here in Astera, and you know, little homie knows his shit. Once you get enough research points on the monster, he'll pretty much have the best hit zones laid out for you. And I even checked to see if there was anything, you know, they missed, any kind of hidden hit zones. For example, in past games, Teostra had a pretty solid hit zone on his back legs, and you could do an entire hunt only hitting the back legs if you were scared about standing in front of him. But in World, it looks like Teostra finally stopped skipping leg day, and that hit zone is no longer there. So, you know, don't hit back here, he doesn't take any fucking damage. Something that has always given us an advantage has been his big ass head, so you know that's still a thing. We still got the tail weak spot as well, so that's pretty good. And a new one that we got is actually the wings, so at least if you accidentally hit them now, it's not wasted damage or wasted time or anything. If you're looking for an elemental approach, you still want to go with water or ice. And in the past we were able to use poison to kind of nullify certain auras from some of the Elder Dragons. But in this game, they've tied all kind of aura nullifying effects to Elder Seal, and all we really need to know is that it can help nullify Teostra's auras, which we're going to talk about next. It's the auras. Alright, so your boy Toasty is going to have two forms that you're going to encounter while fighting him. Bakugo and Super Hot Fire. What the hell? Huh? Let me explain. Bakugo is Teostra's Enrage and Blast aura. When he enters this state, he's going to cover himself in what looks like the Blast ailment, and he's going to create many more blast clouds with his attacks and when he moves around, and he's going to try and more actively detonate them as well. Super Hot, on the other hand, is his flame aura. This is when he gets completely engulfed in flames, and it's this aura that's tied to the supernova, but more on that later. I don't know too much about gunning, but I believe this aura will also nullify certain ranged attacks as well, so be wary of that. And lastly, this aura will also affect certain attacks, but I'll talk about those moves specifically when we get there. Now, an interesting and dangerous thing about his auras is that they can overlap with each other. I mentioned how his Enrage is tied with his Blast aura, and his Supernova is tied with his Flame aura, but I found out that he can layer his auras on top of each other. He'll Enrage every time he activates the Blast aura, for certain, which is why I know that they're connected to each other, while he can activate his Flame aura without anything happening. But there were a couple instances where he would activate Super Hot, and he would get Enrage, which means that if it just works out that way, he can activate both at the same time. I think about it just like some monsters in previous games who had Enrages and also power-ups. It seems like his Blast aura works like the standard Enrage, seeing as how it always activates Agitator. You hit him enough times and he gets pissed off. While the Flame aura seems to work sort of like Latent Power, where it's working on its own timer. However, I think it can be sped up by maybe meeting certain conditions or just hitting him as well, just like the skill works for us. And that's why I think there's overlap sometimes between the two auras. An example of this kind of layering was here, where in this case he was in Super Hot Fire, but he had roared a second time and Agitator activated. Here you can hear that my weapon is dispelling one of his auras. But his Flame aura stays on, and he even continues and Supernovas. So what I think happened here was that I actually dispelled the Blast aura, or his other aura that was under, but not his Flame aura. In that case, it was Super Hot above Bakugo. But the other kind of layering is trickier to pick up on and probably more dangerous. And what I'm talking about is when it's the other way around. Now, for a while I started to doubt myself whether or not the Supernova was exclusively tied to the Flame aura, because I had a handful of times, only maybe 3 or 4, where he Supernovaed from the Blast aura. But then I went back and paid attention to what was going on in the fight when this happened, and all the clips had one thing in common, and I'm going to use this one as an example. So I was already fighting him, he had his Blast aura on, and then he Supernovas. But let's run it back to check out something he does beforehand. After he had already been enraged, Agitator's already on, he gets up and roars a second time. Now, I used to think that, maybe he's just roaring to roar, some monsters do that. But I noticed that in all of the clips where he Supernovas, he roars randomly quite a while before he does it. And what I think he's doing here is activating the Flame aura beneath the Blast aura, so we can't see any physical change on the surface. Now, I know it probably sounds like I'm hella overthinking things, which is possible because I overthink everything. But using the method I have of tracking the Supernova, which I'll talk about later, this idea did check out with all of the instances where he Supernovaed from the Blast aura. And seeing as how the other type of layering, the first one, is pretty common, I think that this second type of layering is just as possible and would explain the weird instances where he kinda Supernovas out of nowhere. Lastly, he has these sort of like pre-auras, I don't know what to call it. So sometimes you'll start some fights and he already has what looks like the Blast aura or what looks like a little Flame aura on him as well. Keep in mind that these are not the auras that I just discussed, not the full-on Blast aura or the full-on Flame aura. It's kind of just like miniature versions of those, so he can be covered in Blast, but then he'll roar and activate the real Blast one, or he can be covered in flames and he'll roar and activate the real Flame aura. The tricky part here is that he'll still have some of the properties of the full auras. He can also roar into these pre-auras while already in battle, but they usually don't last too long and then he'll roar into the full auras soon after. It's just good to be able to tell the difference between all of his auras because his fight can be a little chaotic and it can be kind of hard to tell what's going on and what form he's in. We've never really had that issue where having too good of graphics actually makes something a little bit more difficult until now. That was a lot of stuff. Alright, it's time for the moves. First things first, your boy is still a fucking track star. He used to love running, and he still does. At least it's not gonna be like old Teostra, who felt the need to be right on top of you before he did everything else. New Teostra is going to still run a lot, but it's going to be mainly repositioning on his part, and at least it doesn't count as a full-on tackle. If he's running around regularly, it's only going to trip you, but when he roars before running, that's when it counts as the actual charge attack. Now, Teostra can follow up his charge with just about any other of his moves. In fact, he can even follow up his charge with another charge. But what he's usually going to follow up with is one of these new 4 moves that they gave him. You see, new Teostra really likes biting, and just using his mouth a lot more in general, and they've given him a new array of attacks that can combo off of each other if he uses them just back to back. Let's start off with the 2 simpler ones, the first one being his regular bite. The move doesn't look too crazy at first, but from the 4, it's probably the quickest one. It has little to no windup, and for a monster like Teostra, whose fight in the past was more centered around anticipation and prediction, giving him another quick disruptive move definitely adds to his difficulty. He already had the traditional Elder Dragon bitch slap, but now he has another way to catch you off guard, and another quick easy way to proc his blast blight if you've been tagged by it. If you find that this attack is tricking you up a lot, then the best thing you can do is just play at the sides of his head, so that way you're less likely to be hit by it, or you just have more breathing room to get around it. Also note that while in the Flame Aura, this attack will get some additional range, because you know, the fire. The second one is his side bite. This one does have a delay, and a pretty long one too. He's gonna look over his shoulder, like he heard you were talking shit.
Teostra, you suck.
And then he's just gonna bite to his side. Now the notable thing about this one is that if he wants, he can fully turn around with this bite. I used to think it was another attack, but when I was comparing the 2, I saw that they had the exact same windup. So I guess whenever he wants to, he can just fully turn around with this attack, so just keep that in mind. And then of course, this bite is also affected by the auras. Alright, now we're going to talk about the 2 trickier ones, especially because these 2 kind of look like each other, but play out very differently. The first one is not a bite at all, but it looks like it's going to be. It's actually a breath attack that goes in like an arc in front of him. After his little prep, then he'll do his breath attack. Now the key thing to remember here is that unlike his other breath attack, his traditional one, this one's not connected to him. What does this mean for us? Well, that means if we're right in front of his face when he does this, we don't have to do anything. If he does this attack and you're up close and you're attacking him, it's not going to hit you. You want to keep this in mind because you don't want to stop attacking and dodge for no reason. You also don't want to block or guard point, for no reason, or if you're using longsword, you don't want to counter something that wasn't going to hit you and then you end up wasting some of your energy. So if you're close enough, it's just another opportunity for you to do damage. And since it does have some range, if you are far away from him, you want to roll towards him. While I'm talking about this breath attack, you know how Teostra will sometimes retaliate when you flinch him, like he'll do a little bit of a counter? The breath that he does in this retaliation is the same kind of breath. It's gonna go in an arc, and if you're standing in the same spot, you don't have to dodge, because it's just gonna go past you. Just keep that in mind. Also, regardless of which aura he's in, this attack will always be just regular fire, like it won't change the blast or anything. Alright, and the last attack of this 4-move bundle is this shit. This fucking Tokyo Drift attack. This thing used to fuck me up in the beginning. Alright, so this is a bite that he does to also kind of reposition himself. Now the reason this move and the one right before this are tricky is mainly because they're often confused with each other. The reason a lot of people are dodging when they don't have to for the breath attack is because they think that this one's coming. But the key takeaway here is the leg. You see, when he does the breath attack, he keeps both legs on the ground. But for this attack, he's gonna lift up one leg and give you the old razzle dazzle. Don't let that leg distract you though. Once you see him get into that position, you gotta get ready to dodge, counter, guard point, whatever you're gonna do. As some of you have already found out the hard way, this move has a delayed hitbox. So what does that mean? Basically, even though the move might look like it's over, his body is still going to count as if it's still in the attack animation. This can mess up even some of the best of players. So 2 things you want to keep in mind is to not immediately reapproach him after you have dodged it. And remember that leg that he was lifting? The leg that he lifts is going to show which side he's going to drift on, so when you see him raising a side, you know you want to dodge outward and away from that leg. And lastly, this move is affected by the auras, but in a pretty different way. Instead of affecting the bite range or the bite itself, it's going to affect the little skid marks he leaves after he does the drift. So when super hot, he's going to leave a little trail of fire, and in Bakugo, he's going to create blast clouds, but these are kind of annoying because not only do they spread outwards, for some reason the clouds that he creates with this attack, they detonate really quickly. I'm not sure why, but they go off pretty fast, so just be aware of that. Alright, now let's look at some of the classic moves. He's still got his traditional flame breath that he's always had. While he's in Bakugo, it's going to change into blast clouds, and when he's in super hot, it's going to get a lot more range. One thing I really gotta say though is that they got a lot more lenient with the hitbox of this. Back then this fucking thing used to be pretty unforgiving. You could be just right by his cheek and it would still tag you. Now I'm fucking right up in his face and it doesn't even hit me. I've had cases where the flame breath doesn't even touch me even though I'm practically inside it. So you can definitely abuse the traditional flame breath a lot more than you could in the past games. He also has the flame breath that he'll do in the air, although sometimes now he'll fly up and do this like mini dive bomb. I'm gonna be completely honest, I've actually never gotten hit by this thing. So, you know, you can flash bomb the flame breath, and you can't flash him during the dive, but it's okay, because he's not gonna hit you anyway. He has his classic explosion attack where he spreads out some blast dust, and then after some time, he snaps his teeth and detonates the blast clouds. There was a change to this move though. If he does this while he's in his blast aura, instead of detonating them right there in the same spot, he'll leap forward, and then when he lands, that's when they'll explode. Just keep this in mind because depending on where the clouds are, this attack usually is a chance for some free damage, but if he's going to leap forward, then you might get yourself hit. Speaking of lunge attacks, he still has his, but it's a lot better now. He kind of does like a little growl and prep before he jumps, unlike back then when he would just instantly jump to nothing. Also, since it's a gap closer, he mainly does it now when you're actually far away. Before, he used to just do it whenever, no matter what distance you were, so that at least kind of helps with dealing with the move. We got his tail whip. That's not gonna hit you. He's still got his Roy Mustang move, where he kind of just blows up one particular spot. And this move is pretty much the same. Still has a long windup, a nice opening for damage afterwards, and in comparison to previous games, it does seem to be a bit more forgiving. That, or I just used to get hit by it a lot. Now last, but definitely not least, is the Supernova. Now when it came to actually managing the Supernova itself, I was at a dead end for quite some time because I was under the impression that it was like previous games and it was timed. But when trying to time it, I kept getting really inconsistent results. And especially with us being able to knock him down, knock him out of the auras, and Elder Seal now, I wasn't getting a time that I could actually depend on. But then after playing a little bit of Legion with my friend, I got the idea that maybe it works like a raid boss mechanic now, and it's not a time, but after a certain amount of moves that he'll do it. So I gave this a couple of tests, and I actually got a number. After 15 attacks, while he's in super hot fire, he'll Supernova. I'll just do this really quick so you guys can see what I'm talking about. And there it is. Now the tricky thing here is how this number interacts with moves that you interrupt or moves that you flinch him out of. Sometimes it'll seem like he does the Nova after the 14th move, or the Nova is the 15th move. But for the most part, once you start to see him get close to that number, that's when you know to back off. Hopefully this helps you manage the Supernova, and if it can't, honestly, even though it's a lot bigger than it used to be, it still takes forever to go off. You can pretty much just walk away from it when you see it happening. It can also be flash bombed now, which is good. You could cancel out his aura right before it's about to happen. You can knock him out of it. And as a last resort, if you got nothing, you can dodge it. Now, I'm not even going to pretend to know the timing for this. I've only done it like 3 times or something, but it's pretty cool when you do it. Alright guys, that's all I got for you. If there's anything I missed, just feel free to throw it in the comments for me and for anybody else who might need it. And I hope this was helpful. I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.